I'm finally updating my world. After years of being incredibly behind on updates, I'm finally going to be bringing my Let's Play to the current version of the game. But to understand why I'm in this predicament in the first place, we first need to go back to the beginning. This world was generated in 2015 in version 1.8, and it started off as my own personal survival world until I eventually decided to turn it into a Let's Play in 2020. By that time, my world was up to 1.13, but that was 3 updates behind, with 1.16 being the current version. And the reason that I held off was because of this iron golem farm, Tango Tech's Iron Titan. This thing was a beast back in the day. It boasted a whopping 2,600 iron per hour, which was no joke. Iron farms were a lot less commonplace than they are nowadays, and they rarely produced rates as good as this one. But all of this was for a reason, because villages were really annoying to work with back then, and making these farms were a lot trickier to pull off. No greater example of this was with the Iron Titan, which involved spending multiple hours placing and removing hundreds of doors in order to stack the villages together, and it was very easy to mess this up and have to start all over. Suffice to say that when I eventually decided to build mine, it was not my favorite activity, but it was definitely worth it. The farm was an abundant source of iron, and the shell was made as a replica of Nax Ramus from World of Warcraft, and it's still one of my favorite builds to this day. So you can imagine my disappointment when, and I'm not exaggerating here, a week after I finished this build, they announced the Village and Pillage update. This update completely reworked villages and would render my farm useless. All that time I'd put into tediously placing doors would be wasted, and this amazing build would simply become an empty, inert shell. I didn't want that, so I decided to hold off on updating for a bit, but little did I know that that decision would be the beginning of a long odyssey to bring my Let's Play back to the current version of the game. It took me 2 years after my first video before I finally decided to break my Iron Titan and bring my world to 1.14. From there, my plan was to enjoy each update at a time instead of jumping straight ahead. So a year later, I got up to 1.16, and the plan was to update to 1.18 soon after, but then I realized there was going to be a problem. You see, the Caves and Cliffs update unrolled one of the most game-changing features I've seen in a long time. They dropped the bottom of the world an additional 64 blocks, and the deep slate layer begins where the old bedrock used to lie. A fantastic way to implement this feature, but it posed a problem for me. This is the Bedrock Project. Maybe you've heard of it. It's a project that spans a 400 by 400 block perimeter where I excavated all around my beacons and replaced the floor with black stained glass. Because this is on the old bedrock layer, that means when I update, all of this bedrock will turn into deep slate. And when I realized this a few years back, I had a bit of a conundrum. Do I scrap this project, or maybe redo it? Or do I finish the project the way that it was started and update my world as soon as it's done? And you all know what happened. I chose the latter. I figured that it would be silly to do all this work if it was deep slate instead. It only made sense if I finished this project the way it was intended. I told myself, let it be a cool artifact after the world was updated. All of this didn't seem like a bad idea at the time. Holding off on updating again wasn't great, but I figured it wouldn't take more than a couple months. But I didn't yet know that finishing the Bedrock project would end up taking far longer than that. I needed tons of glass, so I redesigned my super smelter and built a crazy dwarven-themed project around it. I made an over-the-top kelp farm for fuel and an animated Dragon Forge interface. I spared no expense. Then, just when I thought I'd get to work, I remembered that there was a large amount of stone sitting in chests down at the project's center. Instead of deciding to just move them, I came up with an elaborate scheme to trade all of the stone away in a crazily over-engineered villager trading hall that I designed based off Westfall from World of Warcraft that then catapulted me into an ever-growing project continuing to recreate Westfall with a custom donkey breeding ranch, the town of Moonbrook, and Blackstone Farmstead, which took over a year to complete and finally trade away my stone reserves. Once that was done, I was finally able to get back to the Bedrock project. Except, remember that Dwarven Tunnel project? Well, I decided to do one more episode to build out a few more tunnels and create a depot system. Then I was finally able to get back to the Bedrock project. It took hundreds of hours of work, many long live streams, and a ton of elbow grease, but I was eventually able to make it to the finish line. The Bedrock project was finally completed after 2 years of anticipation, and at long last, last, I could finally think about updating. Which brings me to the present day. It's been 7 years since I built this iron golem farm, and now is going to be the first time since then that my world will be up to date. But before I do that, there's a little bit of prep work that needs to be done first. You see, the Caves and Cliffs update completely changes terrain generation. Here's a map of the Let's Play's original seed, and here's a map of the new one. Biomes are in different places, they're larger and separated by broader boundary lines, rivers and oceans are different, it's a completely new world. So if I were to update right now, any new terrain that I then generate would be of that new seed, and because I'm a nitpicker, I want to mess with how that's gonna go. Which brings me to a little program called MCA Selector. This wonderful tool allows me to view and modify the chunks of my save file. Here's my main base, over there is Westfall, and I can even adjust the elevation, so there's some of my Dwarven Tunnel project, and if I go all the way down, we will eventually reach the Bedrock project. Pretty cool. MCA Selector allows me to copy, paste, or delete any of my chunks, which gives me the unique power to decide where I want my old terrain to end and my new terrain to start. So, for example, if I didn't want my nether chunks anymore, I could just select them all, hit Ctrl D, and away they go. This is a backup, don't worry. What I actually want to do is go around and trim all the surrounding terrain that I've never used before so that I'll have new generation as close to my base as possible. The idea is maximize the new content while not taking away from what I've already built. And luckily for me, this is going to be a relatively straightforward endeavor because I've never really strayed far from spawn, and the outskirts of my world are almost completely uninhabited. Almost. If I go off to the southwest, you'll find an old outpost I established in a mesa that I used to use for quarrying terracotta and red sand. This building here was my little base of operations, and it's supposed to be the burrow from Harry Potter. I distinctly remember that I built it using this picture of a model as a reference. I felt it suited itself well to a mesa because of all its vibrant colors. Though it's simple, I've always loved this little build, and I'd definitely like to get back into doing smaller things like this, but that's not really why I'm showing it to you, is it? No, I'm showing it to you because I'm gonna be deleting these chunks, and I wanted to say goodbye. I do have this design saved in a creative world though, so I can always rebuild it again someday. It's just not worth saving the original. I will, however, be taking back my beacon. Yoink! So with that out of the way, I'm gonna go ahead and delete this, Control D, and there we go. That's the first of many chunks I'll be trimming out of my world. And actually, let's just go ahead and knock this out too. So all of these outer branches were just exploration and nothing's been built out there, which means what I can do is select my central chunks, hit Control U to invert it, and delete. Now all that's left in my world is what you see right here. Like I said, I never really strayed far from spawn, but I'll tell you what, even this feels a little too much. If we want to look at this purely by where I've built things, there's my base, Westfall, a long stretching ice road that leads to my stronghold, and that's about it. There is also an ocean monument I've drained off to the east, and I've got a cool idea for this one, but for right now, just pretend it's not there. That then only leaves me with these 4 squares south of my base. They've been a very passive part of my world because it's just a cluster of simple ice farms that I'll occasionally use when I run out of ice. The designs are known as ice cubes because they work by pushing formed ice into a perfect cube that you can then instamine. Now that I'm looking at it though, this is clearly not a perfect square, so I don't know what's going on here. I've redesigned these a couple of times at this point, and spoiler alert, I'm gonna be deleting these chunks too, so it doesn't really matter. As far as I know, Etho was the one who first invented the concept many years ago, and since then the designs have been iterated a ton. My version is basically just a huge grid of observers, repeaters, and pistons, which brings me to why I'm actually here, because this is quite a lot of valuable redstone components, and I'm not interested in letting that go to waste. That is a juicy pile of components right there. I don't know about you, but I'd like to build a much better ice farm in the future. These guys were always just a means to an end, and now, well, it's the end. Almost forgot about the beacon. Yoink. Alright, so I'm just about ready for the exciting part here. I'm remembering though that there is one last thing that's gonna get cut, and that's down to the southwest where I've been quarrying sand out of this desert. Deleting these chunks will be nice because it'll erase all the scarred land that comes from doing this sort of thing, and who knows, maybe something really pretty will spawn in its place. Either way, I wanted to come out here because I thought I had beacons set up, but you don't really need beacons to insta-mine sand, do ya? And it doesn't appear that I've left anything else behind either, so these chunks are good to delete. We are, interestingly enough, very close to where my ice road ends, and right below it is where my stronghold is located, so those chunks over there will need to be saved, and it'll be interesting to see how I decide to establish that boundary. One funny thing that's going to come out of this is a few of these areas have portals that go into them, which means that this desert portal, for example, will no longer be going into a desert. But that's okay. Coming up, I've got some big changes I want to make on the nether side, so it doesn't bother me one way or another. Alright guys, this is the part I've been looking forward to. We went through all that stuff because now I'm going to be heavily trimming the chunks around my base. Like I said earlier, I want to maximize as much new terrain as possible without removing anything critical. So that effectively means cutting my chunks down right up to the edge of my base all the way around. And if you're a sharp viewer, then you'll have noticed that a lot of that perimeter has changed from how it used to look last episode. This was my way of essentially getting the terrain ready to transition into the new chunks by smoothing it out and adding jack-o'-lanterns to light it up. Though my original intentions were to be brief, I ended up taking out some sizable chunks of terrain to make this happen. And while I'll freely admit that this was not necessary, I gotta say that this really feels like it opened up my base and leaves me with a nice, if you will, fresh canvas to build upon in the future. But beyond anything else, the most staggering change by far was the removal of my nether mountain. It never looked all that good and was very incomplete, so I just decided to get rid of it, and I'll build a much nicer one in the future. I also removed the template I had for my desert village wall, and this was more or less for the same reason. It was incomplete and I didn't like where it was going, so I took it out. And that leaves me with a fresh area for me to build my village upon when I'm ready to do so. All in all, this terrain cleanup culminated in over 50 hours of work, which really shocked me when I added it all up because, again, my intentions here were to be brief. But hey, I suppose when you're procrastinating from working on a certain video, anything's possible. If you're interested, I actually have a full time-lapse sequence of this entire process on my Discord. Just head on over to Mysteries Minecraft Menagerie and check out the extra content channel. Now, all of this doesn't necessarily mean I've already established my border. Yes, I want my chunks to be trimmed close to these terraformed sections, but I also want to be conscious of transitioning biomes. The big focus of this next step is going to be cutting out my chunks such that the biomes of both my old terrain and new terrain can line up and feel natural. For example, I know that north of this swamp there will be another swamp biome, so I should make sure to cut over the edge of the mountain biome so that it can seamlessly transition from swamp to swamp. And this logic will make its way all around my base, it'll extend over to Westfall, and continue its way all around my ice road and stronghold until I've developed some sort of crude looking L shape that will be the final boundary. And so off I went. I began drawing a boundary line of chunks that would separate my old world from the new. Going into this, I had already done a few little tests, so I knew roughly where this boundary line was going to go. It didn't take me long to get a first draft completed, which meant that I could then load it up in 121 and see what it looked like. As expected, it was decent, but far from perfect. There were plenty of areas that needed improvement, and that meant going back and trying again with a fresh backup of my save file. To be clear, nothing looked outright bad. In fact, the game actually does a really nice job of blending the old terrain with the new. It's not like how it used to be back in the day, where it would just be a sharp line between chunks. Instead, the terrain actually gets smoothed together along with the biome boundaries. This naturally makes the end result look a whole lot nicer and definitely made this process easier, but it also meant that I couldn't really know how something was going to turn out until I'd already cut my chunks. And because I had a very nitpicky vision for the final results, It meant that this took a lot of tries to get it right. Either way, I ended up spending a solid 2 hours to get it all figured out, and once I had the final draft decided, I loaded up one last fresh save file and made the official cut. This is what my world was reduced to. Over 300,000 chunks of fat were trimmed down to only 6,600. And the best part is, it all looks seamless. It's really cool to fly around my world and see dry bushes and cactus flowers. I know that sounds like such a small thing, but you have to realize that I've just made a huge jump. Over 5 years of content is now flooding into my world all of a sudden, and frankly, I'm just not used to seeing new stuff like this. I think I've really been depriving myself all these years. Anyways, plenty of time to drool over new toys later. The point is that new stuff like this is well within arm's reach for me. I mean, look, I can literally see Westfall from here. And the best part is you can't tell one bit that in between these areas lies a complete shift in the seed generation for this world. I mean, tell me honestly, can you spot where the boundary line is? Okay, well, maybe you can see it right here, but this is an easy fix. Everywhere else though, nah, we're chillin'. I'm also glad I did all that terraforming work I mentioned earlier, though I think the game probably would have blended a bunch of this fine. I do feel that my extra effort does aid in some of the closer transitions and just looks cleaner in general. Anything to justify my procrastinating tendencies, I guess. Oh, whoops, I have my clouds disabled. Let me just fix that. And yeah, shout out to the Better Clouds mod. It's such a pretty and simple addition to the game. Also, Pale Garden much? I feel like I need to spell out how crazy this is. Some people have to travel thousands of blocks to find one of these, but this one just happens to be sitting on my front doorstep. I really want to play around with the stuff down there, but for now, I'm just gonna fly over it because there's something else I'd like to show you off to the east. If you remember from earlier, I mentioned that there was a drained ocean monument that I was gonna do something cool with, and well, here you go. I did something cool with it. This area is really unique, and I have a lot of fun ideas about what I could turn it into. It's not often you can build a guardian farm in the mainland like this. All I had to do was make sure to save the monument's chunks while I was deleting everything else, and the game did the rest of the work to blend the two together. It turned out really good, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that if the ocean monument wasn't there, this valley would have been a river anyways, so we basically just spliced in a larger body of water. Either way, this area turned out really cool, and I'm super excited to play around with it in the future. Firefly bushes! Oh, this is so sick. And the dead leaves are pretty cool too. Man, you know I've been starved for content when I'm getting excited about bushes and leaves. But anyways, before I wrap things up today, there's one last thing I wanted to check out, and I'd be honestly crazy if I didn't show this to you. A casual stroll through the Dwarven Tunnel project. I really need to give this area a proper name. Anyways, let's head on down from here to the Bedrock Project. Or, to be more precise, it's really the Deep Slate project now. As planned, converting my old chunks retained all 500,000 of the glass blocks I placed down here, thank God, and the only thing that was actually changed was the bedrock got turned into Deep Slate, and 64 more chunks of underground terrain now sits below me. I honestly don't think I'll explore any of it. If I want to do some caving, I'll just go somewhere else, you know? Also, if you're wondering why the glass isn't connected, it's because, haha, I'm not using Optifine anymore. I'm using Sodium. And while Sodium is a far better performance mod, it does lack some of the features that Optifine had, such as connected textures. There are other mods mods that can do this, such as continuity, but I'm a little on the fence as to whether I should go for it. I'm trying to lean a bit closer to straight vanilla, mainly because I just don't want to rely on a bunch of mods every time I have to update. Now that Minecraft is switching to a bunch of smaller updates each year instead of 2 big ones, it means that mod support has to be updated more frequently, and while there are a ton of mods I still wouldn't go without, I'd like to try and keep the load to a minimum. So for right now, I think I'll pass on connected textures. It's one less thing to worry about, and I honestly don't think it looks too bad. Plus, I feel like glass edges might have some nice building potential. We'll have to see. Either way, this is how the Bedrock project is looking now, and I gotta say, after all these years, all the waiting and procrastinating, after everything, I'm glad I decided to finish it. In a lot of ways, this project represents an older era of my world, of my channel, and now that it's done, and now that I'm finally here all the way updated, it's time to begin a new era. An era where I'm no longer holding myself back and have access to everything. An era of exciting, over-the-top projects that I can't wait to dig into, and in some cases I mean that literally. An era to challenge myself and try new things. An era where, let's be honest, I'm still gonna be the same dingus. Some things never change. If you'd like to learn more about all the mods I'm using and get other information about this world, then that's all available on my Discord. I also like to stream a lot of my progress for these videos, so check out my Twitch if you're interested. Other than that, I think it's high time I pull up my bootstraps and get to work. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.